Does the SEC have a legitimate challenger? MarkRogersTV and ProFootballCentral.com. We are rating the BCS conferences, giving a grade to each BCS conference's performance against the other BCS conferences and their out-of-conference schedule overall. This is a good time to do it because conference play is going to dominate college football for the remainder of the season. We're still going to have some really good matchups near the end of the season, in particular those SEC matchups that we talked about in our last video post. Check it out. Georgia Tech, especially Florida State, and Clemson against South Carolina. But most of the games now in conference. So each conference, obviously, if you add up all the games within the conference, are 500 because they keep playing each other. So either the conference is balanced and they beat up on each other and produce a lot of 8-4, 7-5 teams, or there's a dominant team or two or three dominant teams that beat up on everybody else. And it's difficult to judge whether you're looking for a dominant team or two in a conference, and that's what you're looking for in rating a conference, or is the conference balanced? Are there 5 or 6 decent teams? Obviously, the SEC has been the best conference in college football for a couple years now. Many would argue for the past 7-8 years, maybe a decade or more. I would argue that it's been clearly the best for the last 3 or 4 years. But a lot of people are talking about the Pac-12 possibly challenging the SEC. Let's break down the numbers. Again, check out our SEC post as we talked about the SEC's performance and most notably an 0-5 record against the current top 25. A couple of those games we excused and disclaimed, but others could not be disclaimed at all. How's the Pac-12 doing? 6-3 against the other BCS conferences, 2-2 against the top 25. And they've got a lot of games coming up against Notre Dame is the reason why we made that last bullet point. 2-2 against the top 25, and really that can be explained by Cal, possibly the worst team in the Pac-12, certainly in the bottom 3, playing Ohio State and Northwestern, and not really looking that bad in those two games, in particular against the Wildcats. A 30-30 game in the fourth quarter. Cal lost by 2 touchdowns on a couple late interception pick sixes against Ohio State. They scored a lot of points, weren't really in the ball game in the second half, and lost that 52-34. So those are the 2 losses by the Pac-12 against the top 25 outside of conference. Let's run down each Pac-12 team and the performance against the other BCS conferences. So in the North Division, you've got Oregon, of course. They played Virginia and Tennessee, 2 teams that they should handle, and they did handle. They blew out Virginia and Tennessee from the ACC and the SEC. Okay, Stanford hasn't played anyone. They played Army and San Jose State, so no games listed amongst that 6-3 record against the other BCS conferences. Stanford does have a date coming up with Notre Dame and certainly took care of Army and San Jose State. Washington with 2 impressive wins over Boise State at home. So Boise State didn't check in or factor into that 6-3 mark against the BCS conferences, but certainly against the top 25 at the time. Boise State was number 19 in the country at kickoff, and Washington went out and took on Illinois. The Illini, one of the 3 or 4 worst teams in the Big Ten, but still an improving team. That game on the road, and Washington took care of business there. Worst loss for the Pac-12, certainly the Oregon State loss and giving up a ton of points and ton of yardage to Eastern Washington defeated Oregon State. Okay, the 2 Cal losses to Ohio State, Northwestern we talked about. Washington State lost to Auburn. Not embarrassing there, certainly what could be expected. So keep in mind, as we run this down, we're looking at the record against the other BCS conference teams, the quality wins, and actually maybe some quality losses, because on the flip side, Illinois lost to Washington. That certainly can't be a hit against the Big Ten. Were these games competitive? So maybe they lost some games, but were they competitive? And especially, were lower tier teams in that league competitive against upper tier teams? So for example, in our SEC post, we noted that Kentucky only lost by 2 touchdowns to Louisville. Louisville's the best team in the America Athletic Conference and one of the top 10 or 15 teams in the country. Kentucky, one of the worst 3 teams in the SEC, played a pretty competitive game against Louisville. And were there any bad losses? Any horrible losses? We noted one there with Oregon State losing to Eastern Washington. Or surprising wins. Did somebody pull off a major upset? You're not going to see much of that. Certainly did not with the SEC, and you're not going to see it here with the Pac-12. So we move to the South Division. We see where Arizona State defeated Wisconsin. The disclaimer there is who knows what would have happened had Wisconsin been given the chance by the officials to kick the field goal. That stated, you can't give the win or the loss to Wisconsin. I'm going to throw that one out, but technically, Arizona State won the game against a team that was ranked in the top 25 at the time, Wisconsin. UCLA, probably the most important win for the Pac-12 this young season out of conference has been UCLA going out to Nebraska as a 4-point underdog, facing the tragedy that they had to face, losing the freshman wide receiver that week, going to Nebraska, down 18 in the first half, battling back and winning that game in blowout fashion, 41-21 against a team, again, that was ranked in the top 25 at the time. The Huskers have dropped out of one of the two top 25 between the coaches poll and the AP poll. USC, of course, having its issues, but out of conference, defeated Boston College. Did also defeat, we want to take note here, they defeated Utah State, which doesn't check in or factor into the 6-3 record against the other BCS teams, but just wanted to make note of that. Arizona's played nobody out of conference. Nothing to report. They beat a bunch of bad teams outside BCS competition. Utah's got a couple nice wins against Utah State and BYU, and again, that doesn't factor into the 6-3 mark. So in addition to winning 6 of 9 games and 2 of those losses being the Cal losses to Northwestern and Ohio State, the Pac-12 has won a lot of good games because they match up considerably against the Mountain West. And we know that the Mountain West passed those 6 BCS conferences and possibly ranking ahead of the America Athletic Conference. The Pac-12 schedules a lot of teams out west like Utah State and Fresno State, and they have fared well with a couple of nice victories here. And then Colorado had one game against Fresno State of note, but that was canceled due to weather issues. So that's the way it stacks up for the Pac-12. 6-3 against the BCS, 2-2 against the top 25, and 3 games upcoming against Notre Dame. That would be USC, of course, Stanford, and Arizona State. Pac-12, SEC. Is there a challenger to college football's best conference, the winner of 7 consecutive BCS national championships? Would love to hear what you have to say. Please chime in on the Pac-12 and college football conferences. We give the grade to the Pac-12. We've got to give them a B+. Few things knock them down here, but impressively, again, 6-3 against the other BCS leagues, and that includes Cal taking on Northwestern and Ohio State. The big win by UCLA at Nebraska. We're going to throw out the Wisconsin-Arizona State game because of what happened there. And even a down USC team has beaten Utah State and BC. Another win by Utah over Utah State and BYU. The conference has been impressive this season. So again, Pac-12 fans, let you know what you have to say. We would like for you to chime in now, right here on Mark Rogers TV and ProFootballCentral.com.